we're going to have what we call these brief MACPA live talks. So how many of you guys are familiar with TED Talks? So TED, technology, entertainment, design, you know, kind of revolutionized these inspirational talks. And so when we saw that, we tried it out with a group of our Business Learning Institute thought leaders about leadership topics. And it blew us away, right? We got like 10 people, 6 to 8 minute talks, and we just got this ton of great content in a really short period of time so that everyone would be up to speed. And then we had a conversation around like, what's all that mean? What's sticking out for you? Where do you see this going? And so when we started thinking about all of you all being here for our summit, we said, wow, what an opportunity to tell the XBRL story from all the different angles that we've been seeing. I mean, we've been really lucky here at the association. We've been playing around with XBRL, but as we've met folks along the way, we're finding all of these kind of really revolutionary uses that we kind of feel hasn't been told in that context. So we see people, every time we hear about XBRL, what comes to mind? SEC reporting. And not really good things about that, right? It's a pain, it's a compliance thing. And so we've known Eric and his partner Mike Willis, who've been telling us about this. We felt it was important to the profession, so we've been writing about it, right, Bill, for probably 8 or 9, 10 years, yeah. Way back when the CPA Vision started, Louis Mathern actually had us facilitate XBRL International Strategic Plan. I think it was in 2000? 2004, yeah. So only 8 years ago. So we started getting exposed to all this, and we said, there's something really important happening here. And then finally, we went to Eric and said, if we can't figure this out and know what it really means, we don't know that we can help much. So Eric's like, well, why don't you devote a little time and energy and try to figure out how to tag your financials? So this story goes back to Don Tapscott. Don Tapscott wrote Wikinomics. I don't know if many of you know that, right? He's been an avid writer of a bunch of stuff. He was at an association conference one time, and he said, if you want to keep up with technology, you need to hire a 16-year-old. This is about 7 or 8 years ago. And I'll never forget, because coming back from that, that was like resonating in my head. And at that time, there was all these trends about this thing called Second Life. All the social media thing was starting. Remember that? That's exactly right. So I went back and I'm sitting there thinking, and both sons, Andrew and Thomas, are gamers. So they were on these games playing with people all over the world. And so I went to them and I said, I'm hearing all this stuff about Second Life. Like I'm hearing it in business press. I'm hearing it in like Wired magazine. When those things start to come together and those kind of trends, then I start going, something's up. So I told them, I said, hey, help us figure out this Second Life thing. So like in a weekend, they had a house up and everything else. And then there's Byron, another young professional. I'm riding up to Western Maryland with him, and he's building his first office in Second Life. So all those kind of things came together. So these guys built our Second Life thing. Next thing I know, we're in the Journal of Accountancy. Now, if you guys are, any of you that are CPAs who understand the Journal of Accountancy, think about that. Like Second Life in the Journal of Accountancy. I still don't know how we got published, neither does the editor, Joanne Fiore. She's like, I don't know how I got that by the editorial board. But it got published, right? And some professors out in Western Maryland who were watching it and playing around with it got us published in that. So fast forward, when we started to do XBRL, it was time to talk to son Thomas, who was interning with us that summer, and I said, you know a lot about computers. Could you spend a little bit of time, have Eric kind of show you the way and see what happens? And sure enough, that's what he did. So he tagged our financials. The next thing I know, him and Skip are presenting at the XBRL US conference. We had a case study that Altova printed, and here we are in the Journal of Accountancy. So the only times I've ever been in the Journal of Accountancy are when my sons were involved. What's that tell you? So the real Tom Hood and the real Andrew Hood, right? So I think that's one of the interesting serendipities about how we got here, and I think it's going to be fun to hear all these different angles. And then we're going to facilitate with you guys and ladies what sticks out and where do you think this is going? What can we do to maybe help some of the adoption here? Because I think there's some things that this could really help us with as a profession, as a country for that matter, that we should be thinking about. And I want to close with this final thought, because I was trying to think about, like, how do I convey this? And it has a lot to do with who we are as an association. So our purpose is to help our members thrive in rapidly changing times. That's what we stand for at the association. And as I thought about that, Skip and I and Thomas, and we've had our little brainstorms even with Eric sometimes in the early days, we started to ask ourselves, like, why do we think this is so important? And because it has everything to do with what CPAs do, right? It has everything to do with how we deal with data, what the data means, helping make sense of a changing and complex world, which is the purpose of the profession. So it ties to all the research and everything else that's happened from a technology standpoint. But we were with Tom Peters a couple of summers ago at this little small cupcake shop in Georgetown. And we had this opportunity, it's rare, where there was about 30 of us. Skip was there, I was there, you were on vacation, I think. Pam, there's about 5 of us and about another 20 people with Tom Peters for about an hour and a half. Now, Peters charges about $90,000 for a keynote. So I figured that was a pretty good value for the cost of like a donut and a couple. But we actually got to sit and talk to him. Well, and in the course of talking to him, he was explaining, he's an avid reader, and he talked about this book, The Summer of 1787. This is about the First Continental Congress, right? When they founders met in Philadelphia and signed for the, and the story Peters tells, he calls it showing up Delaware style. I want to change that, and I've actually researched it, that it's also showing up Maryland style. So here's the story, right? It's a hot July in Philadelphia, 1787. So like about a week ago when it was 100 degrees here and 100% humidity, imagine that, right? And all the colonials wearing wool suits, wigs, going in to start thinking about how they make this new country, right? And so he said, the Constitution wasn't really written by all the famous founding fathers you think. Because what happened is they would have the big meeting, and they would all make their speeches, and then they were hot, so they'd go to the bars. And the small committees were left behind to actually draft the language. And so the committees that were the most present were the little delegation from Delaware and a little delegation from Maryland. Because all the famous guys were like Pennsylvania, Virginia, right, those kind. So what Peter says is, the interesting thing is the guys who showed up, those little committee meetings, changed the world. And his point is, a small group of people actually can change the world and usually do. And so I think about that from this XBRL standpoint, because all the folks that I've met along the way here are people who are passionate about really making a huge impact. And for me, that's pretty neat, and that's something that we think is important to bring to our members and beyond. So that's really why we're gathering today, kind of before our summit. So I encourage you to read this book too. It's a great book, Summer of 1787 by David Stewart. But I just thought that was to me, that's what sums up this whole effort. So with that, we're going to start off with our talks. We're going to kind of do rapid